Hey gang, listen, I wanted to show you something that I've been working on for the past few days. You may have heard that Midjourney came out recently with an update on being able to save your own styles. So I've been tinkering with this, experimenting with it, and I wanted to show you a little bit about what that can do for you. Now, to begin with, I'll say that it's not as impressive as I had hoped. I was kind of hoping that I'd be able to just upload a bunch of my pictures and define a style, and I can start cranking out pictures. I think once you get a chance to get a feel for how this can be used, it is a little bit of a time saver, and you can create much more consistent styles in your Midjourney work. So I'm going to walk you through, first off, how to actually apply the style to your prompts. Then I'm going to follow up with how do you actually create the styles to begin with. And then I'll walk you through some of my experiments and some of the things that I was realizing along the way, the nuances. I have a handful of tips and tricks that might be useful as well. So let's jump into it. Okay, so let's start with showing you how to apply styles to your prompts, and then we'll follow it up with how do you actually create the style to begin with. So let's jump over to Midjourney here real quick. Now, I've already set up something so you don't have to watch me type and we don't have to wait for anything to generate. But what I've got here is just a real basic prompt, a woman dancing at a basement house party. And I'm applying a style by just simply using the style parameter like you would use any other parameter. If you're familiar with the style parameter, right now it's fairly limited. You can either choose between default or raw. If you leave it out altogether, it applies the default style to it, and that's just a style that Midjourney has configured at some point. The raw style is really just getting the image as it's coming back from the AI, so nothing is applied to it, right? So in this particular case, I've pre-configured this style, and I know that this looks like a pretty wonky name for a style. We'll get to that when we go to create our own style, but this style is something that I set up really just to make it easy to apply photorealistic characteristics to an image, right? So in this, I have a professional camera associated with it, some aperture and f-stop settings, lighting, that kind of stuff. You can set these up and have them as their own individual styles, and then you can apply them here. So this really helps keep things fairly consistent. Now, what you see here is really, like I said, just a simple prompt applying those camera settings to it so I get this photorealistic look. If I did not include the style, this is what I would end up with, right? So you can see that this is more of a digital illustration kind of a look and feel. This is the default styling. If you had put in style raw, you get something back that was more like a photograph, but of course you don't have the control over the specific camera, the settings, the lighting, the other kinds of things that you can add into it. So now let me show you how to create your own style, and then we'll come back to running those styles and seeing some of the effects. Let's go back over to Midjourney, and how you actually create your new style is you type tune, and you type in something that sort of defines the style that you're looking for, and simply hit enter. Now what it's telling you here, first off, it's warning you that you're going to be using some of your fast hours, right? It defaults to these 32 style directions, and I'll explain that in a second. And associated with that, it's going to take 0.3 fast hours. So if you chose more style directions, it's going to take longer. If you chose fewer style directions, it's going to take less time. Now, I'll get into this in a little bit when I walk through some of the experiments that I ran earlier, but I'm not sure that it's always best to go with the smallest setting. If you're just tinkering around and you're just trying to see how this works, then sure, go with that so you don't waste too many of your fast hours, but there is some benefits to doing this higher. Now, what this is actually giving you is a certain number of images that it's going to return back, and you're going to be able to configure your style by saying, I like this one, not this one, and so on down the list, right? So it helps educate the model to understand like your style is really about, what you really want it to look like. So I'm just going to set it down to the lower one, and I'm going to set this to the raw mode. So you can choose between raw and default here. If you leave it on the default mode, it's going to apply Midjourney style to it and use what you've put in here and sort of merge those two together. To me, it feels a little better to actually just stick with the raw mode and start from there. Have a nice clean slate. I don't know if there's any truth to that. I'll have to experiment more to see if that's actually true, but that's just my thinking right now. It's going to ask you, are you sure? I say, and you just click it and you say yes. No. Okay, our style tuner is ready. Okay, so a style tuner is what we use to configure our style, right? So we entered in a prompt, and it's going to come back with what it thinks we're talking about, but we're able to fine tune it from there. So it'll give you a link. So let's just do that. We'll open this up, and here's our tuner. So what this does is it provides us a series of comparisons on the left and on the right, and we'll choose what fits our style the way that we imagined it, right? So it took our prompt and it created a whole bunch of images, but you can see how there are slight variations in this. And so this allows us to be able to really dictate, I want specifically this for my style. Now, one tip before we get into this here, though, is that it's probably a good idea to bookmark this, because this is not very easily remembered. It doesn't show up in your profile, as far as I can tell. So if you want to be able to use your style, you remember those codes are pretty cryptic. If you want to be able to remember a specific style, you need to get back to here. So for me, now what I can do is I can come into here and I've got all of these that I've set up already. I can just jump to them at any point. So what happens here on this tuner is we're supposed to go down and take a look at the left and the right sides and decide which one do we think fits our style the way that we want. So I'm just going to do this really quickly. So I like maybe this one a little better because I want to have some more clouds. Go over here. I really like the dark versus the light sky. This one's too much of an illustration, and this one is just too blank. So I'm going to leave it in the middle here. That means I'm not choosing either one. You don't have to choose one or the other if you don't want to, if neither one of them really suits your fancy. Now you'll see down here at the bottom, I've selected 4 out of 16 so far. And sticking to a number between like 5 and 10 is probably a good range to fit. If you add all of them, chances are you're going to have a pretty wide spectrum, so it might not be as specific as you like. On the flip side, if you choose too few, it's going to sort of over-fixate on a specific image potentially. You might think that just means it's going to be really, really precise, but it's not. It needs a little bit of flexibility to be able to come up with like a really good variation for whatever prompt you're applying it to. So between 5 and 10 is a good thing to shoot for. Maybe that one, and that's it. Okay, so I've got 8 that I've answered. So we'll see how that works. Now, notice you have your prompt, and it's got your code, and you can go and copy this whole prompt, and we could use it to test out how this is working. So let's just give that a quick try. Let's do that. Let's just do the whole thing. It's probably going to give us something that's very close to what we saw. Okay, while that's grinding away, you can see this is looking pretty close to what we've defined. Let's try that airplane example. Oh, it's kind of nice. I like that, like the really puffy clouds there. Okay. Well, at any rate, so now I'm going to airplane flying over a small town, and I'm just going to add the style code, right? So we'll see what we get out of this. Well, it has some of the colors, right? And so here's the tricky part. And this is what you'll have to figure out how this is going to work for you. So I didn't really get the sunset part. I didn't get the real blue hour, but you got the color scheme associated with this, right? So it's really important for you to think about that when you're defining your style. Think about style, not stuff, right? If you put in, so here's what it will look like without the style. So it's definitely a lot closer to our style than this is. So you can see that it had some sort of impact. But what I mean by make sure that you lean more towards style over stuff is if you put in a prompt of, let's say, a dude on a scooter, and you expect it to be able to apply a dude with a scooter on every prompt that you make. If you did, fall leaves in a field, and then you applied your style, you're not going to get fall leaves in a field with some dude in a scooter going through. What it's looking for is like the vibe, the style of the pictures that you're picking up. So a lot of it has to do with colors, that's for true, but it might also get lighting effects, the contrast, whether or not it's a sort of photographic style versus an illustration style, that kind of stuff. So what you're really looking for is to give your images a vibe of something. So in our case, this is not quite what I was hoping for, but you can see with a little bit of tweaking and just like nudging your styles in one way or the other, you might be able to apply things in different ways. So let me show you one other thing on this though, real quick. I'm going to flip back over to here. This style that we've defined isn't fixed, right? It's fixed in the sense of these are my 16 pairs that I can choose from, but I can come back in here and I can make some changes, right? So let's flip it. So make a dark version of this. And the first thing that I'm going to show you is that I chose this one to begin with, right? So if I chose this one, look, I don't know if you noticed that, but the code changed. See, you click back and forth. The code is changing. So this is part of the reason why I was saying that choosing the lower style directions is actually limiting you down the line, right? If you chose a higher one, you have a broader range of sub styles that you could choose from here. I might be able to have a light version of this and a dark version of this, and each of those would have their own code specifically here, right? Which is one of the reasons why I say bookmark these things, because you'll want to come back every so often and tweak these, if you will. So let's give this a try and see what we can get if we chose a whole bunch of darker ones. So this one's kind of dark. I'll leave that one. This one is a little bit as well. And I'll leave that one. Okay, so now my code is this. At any point, you can always leave the raw on there or not. And so you get two styles in one for this. So let's try this again. Here we go. And we'll just add our style. Oops. Add our style parameter there. Now let's see. Hopefully what we'll see come back is something that is photo realistic of sorts, more like this, but also color scheme like this, but darker. I know some of these are still a little, that one's a bit of an illustration, I suppose. Some of these are less so, but I did choose a couple of them that did have that more illustration style to it, so that has an impact. So what you'll end up having to do is tweak it and find what really works for you and what you're trying to accomplish. So let's come back here real quick. I want to show you a few other things that I ran. So here's one, speaking of sort of color schemes or sunsets and landscape or whatever. I set up this other style here to be of Dutch Renaissance paintings, right? So in this case, you could see that you've got a particular painting style, even that's applied to this as well. I put in Dutch Renaissance painting, bright blue hour lighting, dramatic clouds, horizontal composition, right? And so I got a bunch of these things that came back. And so at some point I came along here and I selected the ones that I liked and didn't like, and so on. I ended up with a code and then I applied it back over in here, right? And this is what I ended up with. Now, again, I could go and tweak those just like we did. And here's what I did where I chose more dramatic color schemes and then, ran it against the same prompt, right? Woman in a flowing dress, long hair, blowing, overlooking a vast area, same prompt, different style, and I get something totally different that's back. All right, and so I went and I played around with this quite a bit actually, and this is the same style. So look at the URL here, EV2 something something something, right? same URL, same URL. I'm going to the same place, but I'm choosing different selections to be able to get different codes for each of them, right? So when I come back in here, I've got something specific in a certain way that is still within the set of my style, but it's a sort of a subset or a sub-style within it. Now you can also go and add other parameters in some cases. I'll get to this in a minute, but you can add different aspect ratios, obviously. So same style, same prompt again, but just changing the size of the picture. Now I went and I tried to use a slightly different prompt on it, and it didn't really get there, right? Because it didn't really fit the style that I had chosen. So this is the same style as above, but I just tried to put her in 1980s clothes. Didn't quite work, right? So this is why you'd have to go back to your style and tweak it, reconfigure it a little bit. And here I did the same thing again, and I chose some different options, and I got something that looked a lot more 1980s style in this case. Although at the same time, I also lost my painting style, and this is looking a little bit more. Oh, you know what I did now that I'm looking at it? I did not include the raw. So it's applying that Midjourney sort of digital illustration style to this on top of what I've concluded or used. So I wonder if that would have had an effect. Okay, so something to note. Typo on my side. At any rate, another thing that you can do is you can also zoom. So I zoomed out of this one. This one looked kind of like a fun picture. If I include more modern terms in here, maybe I could have even got like that Dutch Renaissance style applied to something that's very urban and contemporary. So at any rate, you can zoom out. You can do all those kind of fun things. And the same thing here on my 80s style and so on. Now there's one other thing that I want to call attention to with this particular test here. I actually created a whole new style that is a good example of what I mean by I choose a prompt that is about style, not stuff. This picture here, the style was based on this prompt here, woman with flowing red hair, photorealistic, flowers in hair, right? And I went through, and this is kind of what I had in mind. What I ended up with was something that wasn't anything like what I thought I would get. No flowers, no red hair, or anything like that, because it's not pulling the stuff, right? In some cases, I could get a little bit more red out of it, but you know, what it was looking for is style things. So, I mean, it got the flowing red hair. Well, I guess that was actually included in my prompt, so who knows? It probably didn't even get that right. That just did not work at all. So again, focus on the style. Don't worry about the stuff. Put the stuff in your prompt here, and you'll have a little bit better luck. Okay, so if you have a few more minutes, I really want to walk you through at least a little bit of some of my early experiments. I had a lot of thoughts along the way, and you'll find the same when you start tinkering, right? It's important to get your hands dirty to see how it works with your own particular styles, how it works with your own particular prompts and what you're trying to accomplish. And you'll get to learn about what makes most sense for you. So let's go back here to begin with. Now, this is the Midjourney help documentation. So tip number one, they have documentation that has all the details of how this works. There's a new page that's been added to their documentation. I will say I found that their images and their examples were so generic that I had a hard time trying to really understand what this is really about. So again, get your hands dirty and try things for yourself. But at the very least, know that this page is out here that has all of the technical details, what you can do and what you can't do. Now, tip number two, before you start going and using up your fast hours, experiment with your prompts that you might want to use just by generating images. I wanted to get started with choosing a particular sort of photorealistic setting and style, right? So there are a lot of influences that can go into that, from the camera to the lighting to all the technical details of how to take the shot and that kind of stuff. So I'm just showing the same prompt with different kinds of details added to it, choosing different cameras, technical details, lighting. And you can see that the style that comes from this can be dramatically different based on what you're trying to accomplish. And you'll have a much better idea of what might work once you try to go and create your style. So that's what I did here, right? This is where I ended up with. What that translated to is this defined style, right? So person in a crowded scene, ultra high definition photograph, and so on. And it gave me a bunch of different pictures that it associated with that particular style. You can see some of these are clearly not what I was looking for. This is an illustration. It's not a photograph at all. Some of these look a little bit too digital painty like. Some of these are too washed out, and so on. And once I got something that I thought would work, I just clicked on copy the whole prompt. It's probably good practice to just run that to see if it looks like what you thought, right? To be able to experiment and reverse engineer what it thinks your style is, what it's actually outputting. So in this case, just running it straight just to see what it came out like. This is pretty close. It's a little lighter than I had expected, not quite as dramatic as I would have hoped. But then I tried it with a real basic prompt, and obviously it got messed up, right? Clearly my style was not going to work here. And so what I realized was that I had to go back to my style and reconfigure it. And what it had turned out is I had too many things selected, but it was really not going to work. So I ended up having to go back there and tweak it a little bit more until I finally got something that was workable for me. And what this meant was I was going back and forth, running with and without my style to see what am I going to get if I start with man on the street, if I apply my style to it. Okay, well, this is getting a little closer to what I'm looking for, but I want somebody in a crowd, so I added them on a crowded street. And this is my next tip. You never know what it is extracting out of those images. I got it to the point where I was getting the right kind of contrast and lighting, but at the same time, I started to realize that they're backwards. They're looking away. And if I went back, I could see evidence of this in some of the other ones as well, right? So that was somehow included in my style. So I had to go back again to these pictures and find the things where people are looking the wrong way. I probably had this one selected and some of the other ones where people are not looking straight at the camera. But it's a trial and error process of being able to find the right selection to get what you're really looking for. And you never know what it's going to land on. At some point, I finally managed to get my style working properly, right kinds of contrast, right kind of lighting, facing forward, and so on. And then what I started to notice was, well, look at all these smiles. I'm not trying to make snapshots. So I thought, okay, well, that's easy enough. I'll just add a no parameter in here, no smiling. And it just wrecked it, right? So the next thing to consider is that some of these parameters don't work with defined styles. Not sure why that is the case. It's actually noted in here. So down in here, what this is saying is that this tune parameter is compatible with the following parameters. Another way to think about this is that it's not compatible with other parameters. I didn't go through test different parameters, but it certainly is true for the no. And so that was going to be a real problem, because how do I extract things from a prompt that I want to make sure isn't considered? That's a very important part of a prompt, right? And so in my case with the smiling, if I didn't want them to smile, I could just tell it to do something else, right? So I gave them pensive expressions. This is not always easy to do. Another way to do this is to use weights. You can use weights to be able to say, I want something and I want something else less. And if you happen to use negative prompts, that will extract it from the possible outputs, right? That's another technique that you can use when you're defining your styles. So then I started tinkering a little bit further, and I was still falling back on these snapshot views, which I didn't really care so much for. After a certain amount of configuring, choosing the right selection of images, I finally was able to get this closer to what I was looking for. Got the colors were closer to what I was looking for. I would ignore the fact that Midjourney clearly has no idea what cotton candy looks like. That never came out. That has nothing to do with the style. But nevertheless, one of the things that I started to realize, it was overfitting on some of the pictures that I chose in the sense that I was getting the same people back. So look at this woman here, for example. This is like the same woman. This is clearly different, but you could see her in other pictures. Here she is again. Here she is again. Here she is again. Now, but even worse is this dude, who I think probably exposes some of the biases that are problematic with AI right now, in the sense that they tend to fall on cliche stereotypes. So I was trying to get away from that. Nothing I could do in my prompts could get away from this guy. It was not as varied and really not the look that I was trying to go for. And so one of the things I started to realize was that maybe I need to have much more atomic level styles so that I can chain them together. And you can chain these styles together if you include a dash in them. So in here, I have two styles separated by a dash. Here's my original style. And then here's a style that I made that was specific to trying to find better examples of African American men. Now, again, I was starting to find that